My name is Winifred, and at 23 years old, kicked out at 18, blamed for a theft. 4 years later, my grandfather exposed their lies, and I became the heir to everything they tried to take. My father kicked me out on Christmas Eve for something I did not do. I constructed a life without him and believed I had left everything behind. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. 3 years ago, my family booted me out on Christmas Eve. I'm traveling home today to celebrate my grandfather Edward's 72nd birthday. This is the first time I'll see my folks and Rachel since that night. The roadway is vacant. The sky was scarred with winter clouds. And as I come closer, my chest feels heavier. I'm not the same 18-year-old kid anymore. I'd constructed a little e-commerce firm, gained independence, and established a life outside them. However, no amount of achievement can soften the blow of treachery. The house was in pandemonium long before that night. My mother, Vanessa, was preoccupied with looks, perfect decorations, banquets, and falsehoods. Rachel, my sister, was the golden kid, spoiled, theatrical, and spiteful, as only siblings can be. If I breathed incorrectly, she mocked me. If I remained silent, she labeled me worthless. Vanessa constantly supported her. My father, Gregory, was a formidable attorney who intimidated judges and annihilated opponents. But at home, he remained mute. Instead of establishing limits, he let them to run the show. If Vanessa claimed I was lazy, he would agree. If Rachel had said I was a disappointment, he turned away. I learned to live around them rather than with them. I spent the most of that December immersed in scholarship applications, brainstorming ideas for a little internet company that I hoped would get me out of the house. Late at night, while everyone else was asleep, I'd sneak into Gregory's office to print paperwork and conduct research. It was the only establishment with a functioning printer and a reliable Wi-Fi connection. Christmas Eve dawned frigid and brittle. The tree in the corner was shining. The home was filled with the aroma of cinnamon and pine. Vanessa was in hostess mode, shouting instructions and cleaning wine glasses as if the Pope was arriving for dinner. Rachel strutted about in a fashionable coat she had requested as a Christmas necessity, taking pictures in front of the fireplace. I kept out of the way, attempting to help where I could while counting down the hours until the day was over. Gregory then beckoned me into the living room. "Where is it?" His voice was not elevated, yet there was something threatening about it. "Where's what?" I inquired, puzzled. "My watch," he said abruptly. "The Rolex GMT Master 2 is white gold, the one your grandpa gave me when I became a partner. $40,000, Winifred." "It's gone." I blinked. "I know nothing about it." Vanessa laughed sharply and without humor. "Of course not. That is always your answer, acting as if you're too preoccupied with your small projects to notice anything." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I have been." Rachel cut in. "Don't lie. I spotted you at Dad's office last week beside his drawer, presumably plotting something." "I was printing a scholarship application," I explained, my voice tense. "I did not touch anything." Vanessa folded her arms. The ideal representation of mock worry. "You have been creeping about for weeks. Desperate, secretive. It is evident what you did." "What are they desperate for?" I inquired, fury coming in. "You've never cared about what I do. You simply want someone to blame." Gregory moved closer, hovering over me. "This is not about assigning blame. That watch means more to me than you would ever realize. And now it is gone. I did not take it." My voice cracked from frustration. "I didn't realize it was gone until now." "Liar." Vanessa's voice was chilly. "You've been a disappointment from the moment you were born. This is only proof." Rachel gave a harsh chuckle. "I told you, Dad. She's probably attempting to sell it to support one of her fraudulent business ventures." That was it. Something inside me broke. "You have no notion what I'm trying to do," I replied, staring at them. "I'm trying to make something of myself. I'm striving to be better than this." Gregor's eyes hardened. "Do not raise your voice at me. You have embarrassed this family for the final time." "I didn't do anything," I said. "You are accusing me of something I did not do." Before I could continue, Gregory moved to his desk, opened the drawer, and took out the empty Rolex box. He tossed it across the room. It collided with the wall near me and landed on the floor. "Get out," he ordered, his voice low and firm. "Pack your things. Leave this house. You're not part of this family anymore." The Christmas tree lights flashed in the corner. Carol sounded weakly on the stereo. Outside, snow began to fall. In the midst of it all, my father stood there, not as a guy I adored or admired, but as someone who had decided I was no longer worth claiming, I murmured. "You are making a mistake," Vanessa hissed. "Was it necessary to keep you here for so long?" Rachel grinned, arms crossed. "Merry Christmas." I didn't utter another word. I went upstairs, packed a single duffel bag with my clothing and laptop, and exited the front door. Before I even got to the driveway, the door closed behind me. The porch light flickered out, like if they couldn't stand to see me leave. It was Christmas Eve. I had $80 in my pocket, no place to sleep, and no one in the house cared whether I froze in the snow. That was the night everything ended. And that night, I promised they'd never have influence over me again. When I got to the end of the street, it was snowing heavily. The lights from my house gleamed warmly behind me. Muffled Christmas music is slipping through the walls, a celebration that I was no longer a part of. My hands were numb and the duffel bag straps dug against my shoulder. The cold was harsh. But it wasn't what hurt. What stung was that they did it tonight on Christmas Eve. Every home I passed like a postcard. Families gathered at dinner tables. The children tore into their presents. Through the frosted windows, I saw smiles, laughter, and warmth. I felt like a ghost passing through someone else's life. My breath became foggy in the air, and each intake burned. I wasn't sure where to go. I glanced through my phone and messaged Sam, a student with whom I had completed a few group assignments. Got booted out. "Is there any way I may crash tonight?" He responded within minutes. "Come by." His family resided in a little townhouse on the opposite side of town. My shoes were completely saturated by the time I arrived, and my fingers were stinging. Sam opened the door, wearing a Santa hat and bringing a dish of cookies behind him. His family was gathered in the living room to watch a Christmas movie. The fragrance of roast turkey and cinnamon permeated the air. "Man, what happened?" he inquired. "Long story," I mumbled. "Can I just crash on the couch?" "Of course," he responded, standing back. His parents came moments afterward, cordial yet suspicious. "Winifred, right?" his father inquired. "Rough night, something like that." They allowed me in, but I could sense their unease. They chatted in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear. I ate the meal they offered, but their gaze kept traveling to me. A stranger in the middle of a holiday. As they exchanged gifts, I sat silently on the couch, looking at the floor. It was nicer than the cold outside, but it wasn't home. I departed the next morning before anyone was up. I texted Sam to thank him and tell him I would work things out. The weeks that followed blended together. I went from one friend's couch to another, 3 nights here and 4 nights there. I am always careful not to overstay my welcome. Initially, many were sympathetic. They supplied food, blankets, and counsel. But sympathy does not stay long. By the 2nd or 3rd week, the indications began. We'll be having family visits shortly. I need my space back. By the middle of January, I had run out of places to stay. The temperature had plummeted below freezing, and the cold pierced deeper than I'd ever felt before. I spent evenings in bus stops, public libraries, and even behind a gas station, huddled up with my duffel bag as a cushion. I missed meals to make the money I had last longer. I applied for part-time work, but due to my lack of experience, most employers rejected me before I ever had an interview. 2 weeks after being forced out, I decided to return to the house, not to speak with anyone, but to get my old laptop from the garage. It was my only resource for scholarship applications and job searches. I waited till dusk, thinking nobody would see me. They did. Before I could reach the side door, a police cruiser drove into the driveway. Officer Hayes went outside, his breath apparent in the cold. "You, Winifred?" he questioned. "Yeah. Your mother says you're trespassing." "I'm not. I used to live here. I just came to get my laptop. How old are you?" questioned Hayes. He moaned. "Technically, they're still responsible for you. But if you don't want to go back, I'm not going to drag you inside. I'll flag CPS and try to reach a relative. Just don't come back here. They're not going to change. I just need what you need. Lightly interrupting is to stop trying to fix something that's already broken. If you want a future, you build it without them. He released me from any charges. I never went back. A week later, I was seated in the public library, using a free computer, when a woman touched my shoulder. I turned around and for a few seconds didn't recognize her. Beatrice is my father's older sister. I hadn't seen her for over 5 years. Officer Hayes obtained my phone information from a previous report and phoned me as soon as he could, she added. Told me what had occurred. I knew your parents were selfish, but they were tossing you out on Christmas Eve. She shakes her head. You're coming with me. Beatrice had always avoided Vanessa and Rachel, calling them snakes in designer shoes. When she found out I was on the streets, she came to the library where I had been spending my days and gave me a place. It wasn't charity. Beatrice made it obvious. If I stayed, I'd have to carry my own weight. Within a week, she had found me a part-time work at a tiny car repair. The task was demanding. Long hours, oil beneath my nails, and sore muscles. But I did not complain. It was a lifeline. I began saving every penny. A month later, I paid a few hundred for a dilapidated, hardly functioning, second-hand automobile. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine. And most significantly, it provided a roof when I needed it. When Beatrice's extra room was unavailable or I had late shifts, I would park behind a 24-hour grocery shop and sleep there. The grind became my habit with garage shifts during the day and delivery work at night. During breaks, I taught myself coding and digital marketing using free online classes. Every harsh remark Vanessa and Rachel made online about their trips, lavish dinners, and family Christmas photographs added fuel to the flames. Rachel once wrote, "The house feels lighter without dead weight." She intended it as a barb. I took that as incentive. By spring, I had saved enough money to start a tiny e-commerce business. It hardly sold, but it was a start, demonstrating that I could construct anything. A few months later, I received a prestigious technical scholarship. It seemed like the first true win I had ever achieved on my own. Months later, while returning after a delivery, I went by my former neighborhood. The houses were once again illuminated, and music spilled onto the street. I paused across from my family's home. The windows were illuminated, and laughing echoed from within, the same warmth I'd seen from outside. I paused for a while before zipping my jacket and walking away. They decided to kick me out. I decided never to return. 4 years later, I returned to celebrate Grandpa's 72nd birthday. The invitation astonished me. I hadn't communicated with most of my relatives since the day I left. My father never reached out. Vanessa and Rachel pretended I don't exist, but Edward was different. Even after I left, he sent birthday cards, sometimes even checks, and a handwritten message. When I received my scholarship, he was the only person who treated me like I still mattered. I knew I couldn't say no when his card arrived with a handwritten letter saying, "I'd like you there, please come." When I arrived, the driveway was already crowded. Vanessa liked mentioning expensive automobiles in her chats. The home appeared precisely the same. Same porch light, wreath, and pleasant warmth from the windows. Nothing had changed, except for me. I parked down the street and sat in my car for a while to steady myself. Then I stepped outside, fixed my jacket, and approached the door. When I went inside, the cacophony hit me. Laughter, clinking drinks, and music coming from concealed speakers. As I passed, a few relatives whom I hardly recognized nodded politely. Others gazed as if they had seen a ghost. Vanessa spotted me first. Her smile disappeared. "Well," she remarked, holding a wineglass, "look who decided to show up." "Good to see you too," I answered calmly. Rachel followed, dressed head to toe in luxury brands and wearing a phony grin. "I was betting you wouldn't have the nerve," she told me. "I guess I owe Mom $20. I ignored the jab and sought for my father. Gregory was standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand, deep in conversation with one of Edward's friends. He looked up, saw me, and his expression faltered for a second. Then he gave a stiff nod. Nothing more. The tension in the room was thick, but I kept my head up. I wasn't the kid they'd humiliated anymore. Olivia, Edward's attorney and oldest friend, yelled behind me, "I'm glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I responded. She lowered her voice. "Edward's been working on something. Don't leave before the toast." I nodded, not sure what she meant. I spent the next hour avoiding conversations. Vanessa introduced Rachel to anyone who would listen as an up-and-coming entrepreneur, despite the fact that I knew from social media that her influencer projects were failing. My father pretended I wasn't there. Every time I passed them, Rachel's voice rose just loud enough for me to catch a word. Pathetic, still bitter, probably unemployed. I didn't take the bait, and I focused on the reason I was there, Edward. It was nearly 9 p.m. when the clinking of a spoon against a glass silenced the chatter. Edward stood at the head of the long dining table, his posture straight, his voice strong. "Thank you all for coming," he began. 72 years is a long time to be alive, and I'm grateful to have so much family here tonight. He paused, scanning the room. Then his tone shifted, slower, heavier, deliberate. 3 years ago, something valuable went missing from this house. A Rolex GMT Master 2, white gold, $40,000. My son's watch, which my granddaughter, Winifred, was accused of stealing. Vanessa's smile faded as Edward continued. I spoke with an old friend who runs a pawn shop downtown, and he froze when I mentioned the watch. The room grew still. Despite the fact that Winifred had been thrown out and disowned recently, his voice tightened. I discovered the truth. He adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Rachel. He told me that just after Christmas that year, a young woman came into his shop with a matching piece, nervous, shaking, and talking too much. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Rachel's hand trembled around her glass. I showed him a photo of the missing watch, Edward continued, and he didn't hesitate. The same model, serial number, and engraving, he said, and the name on the paperwork, Rachel Carter. The room erupted in whispers. Vanessa's face drained of color. Gregory's hand shook as he set his drink down. Rachel stared at the floor, frozen. We traced the serial number to the current holder using his records, Edward said. After the police contacted them, the watch was returned. But I didn't stop there. He began to pace slowly, his voice echoing off the marble floor. I wanted the complete story, so I asked for help, and we traced the money, which was routed to a debt collector to pay off a boyfriend's gambling issue. Silence fell again. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. And while all of this was going on, Edward said, his voice rising slightly, another $10,000 was spent on a European vacation, first-class flights, 5-star hotels, champagne brunches, and $9,000 was lost in a cryptocurrency scheme that failed in weeks. He turned toward Vanessa. The person you all chose to blame, the one you called a liar and a thief, was trying to survive with nothing. Winifred lost her home, her family, and 3 years of her life because of a story you all never questioned. Edward faced me directly, his eyes soft. Winifred, you were innocent. You always were. The room was silent. Vanessa's lips moved, but no words came out. Gregory stared at the table, unable to look at me. Rachel's eyes were glassy, her expression stunned. I felt a dozen eyes on me, but I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth had been buried for 3 years, and now it was naked in the center of the room for everyone to see. I remained long enough to softly thank Edward. Then I slipped out before dessert, the cold night air hitting me like a wave. I didn't want to see the fallout. I didn't want apologies. The people inside that house had already shown me who they were. As I walked down the driveway, I realized something had changed. For years, I'd carried the weight of their betrayal like a chain. But now, as snow crunched under my boots and the house faded into the distance behind me, I felt lighter. They had tried to bury me with lies, but tonight the truth dug me out. I hadn't heard from my father in 2 days after Edward's party, and then the messages began. At first, they were full of apologies. Against my better judgment, I texted Gregory an address, and he accused me of turning Edward against him, of brainwashing the family and humiliating them in front of their friends. I ignored every single one of his desperate texts about how he didn't know the whole story, that he regretted everything, that he wanted to make things right. When I walked into the small cafe near the old library where I used to study, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a half-finished cup of coffee. He looked tired and older than I remembered, but there was still that same intensity in his eyes. The same man who had thrown me out on Christmas Eve was sitting in front of me as if nothing had happened. "Winifred," he began, standing as if we were old friends, "I appreciate you coming." "Let's just speak," I said, taking a seat. There was a long silence before he spoke again. I owe you an apology, he said finally, his voice low and measured. I was wrong about the watch that night, and a lot of other things. I didn't answer. I wanted to hear what else he had to say. I thought I was doing what was best, he continued. I believed what they told me, and when I saw you in my office, I let my anger take over. I failed you as a father. For a moment, I almost believed him. But then his tone shifted, subtle at first, then sharper. But you have to understand, he said, leaning forward. I was under a great deal of pressure. I had Vanessa in one ear, Rachel in the other, and I didn't know what to believe. And now you've gone and turned my own father against me. I stared at him. Do you have any idea what that toast did to me? He said. The toast? I repeated. It told the truth. That's what it did. He exhaled sharply. You didn't need to make it public. You could have handled this privately. Instead, you humiliated me. Humiliated our family. Our family? I scoffed. The same family that threw me out on Christmas Eve? I'm trying to fix this, he insisted. No, I said. You're trying to fix how it looks. There's a difference. The conversation shifted quickly from calm to confrontational. He slammed his palm lightly on the table. You have no idea what it's like to have everything you've built fall apart because of one mistake. I lost clients. Friends stopped calling. People think I'm a fool. You are a fool, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. You believed a lie because it was easier than believing me, and now you're paying for it. Watch your tone, he snapped, the old authority creeping back into his voice. No, I said quietly. I'm done watching my tone. You kicked me out like trash and let them destroy my name. You didn't even respond to my messages when I begged you to hear me out. And now that the truth is out, you're still trying to blame someone else. The silence between us was sharp, and people at nearby tables began to glance over. Gregory looked around, embarrassed, then leaned in. I'm asking you to move on. We are still family. We can rebuild. Family? I repeated. Family protects you. Family listens. Family doesn't throw a 18-year-old out on Christmas Eve without proof. His voice hardened. You're being theatrical. I already apologized. No, I said, standing now. You said you were sorry you got caught. I'm not sorry for what you did. He got up, his cheeks flushed. You think you're better than me now? Because Edward's giving you money? Because you got a few scholarships? I don't think I'm better than you, I replied. I just know I'll never be like you. Something in his eyes shifted. Anger, pride, maybe even fear. But he didn't stop. One day you'll regret this. One day you'll realize how much I sacrificed. I stared at him for a long moment before answering. You didn't sacrifice anything. You threw away your daughter. I turned and walked toward the door. He called my name, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I stood outside the cafe for a few minutes, the winter air biting at my face. I should have been angry, but instead I felt clarity. My father hadn't come to apologize. He'd come to rewrite the story. He wanted forgiveness without accountability, redemption without consequences. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe him anything. I took out my phone and blocked his number, and the cycle was broken. 2 weeks had passed since the cafe confrontation, and I had not heard from my father since the day I walked away. But then Edward called. His voice was calm, but there was something deliberate beneath the surface. I need you to come by the house, he said. There's something we need to talk about privately. I drove over the next morning, not knowing what to expect. He greeted me at the door with a firm handshake and led me into his study, which smelled of old books and cedar and was lined with decades of family history. On the table in front of him were several folders, each thick with documents. What's all this? I asked. Evidence, he replied, and a very big problem. Edward explained that after the truth about the watch was revealed, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. The way Vanessa and Rachel had manipulated my father so easily, the way they lied without hesitation, it had left him unsettled. So he began digging. Over the course of 2 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars had quietly vanished from company and personal accounts. It all started with a review of the family company's financial records, which initially appeared to be in order. Then inconsistencies began to emerge. Small withdrawals here, unaccounted transfers there. Vanessa had been issuing company credit cards in her name, charging them with business expenses such as designer handbags, spa treatments, and private chauffeurs, as well as funneling company funds into side ventures, failed influencer projects, expensive vacations, and even a short-lived clothing brand that folded in months. And that wasn't the worst of it. Edward opened another folder and handed a paper across the desk. A hefty loan agreement taken out in Gregory's name, but the signature wasn't his. Forged? I asked. Edward nodded grimly. Your mother signed it. She used the money to bail Rachel out of a failed cryptocurrency scam. He leaned back, folding his hands. They hadn't just destroyed trust, Winifred. They had been bleeding the family dry while blaming everyone else for their mess. He flipped to another set of papers. $500,000 had disappeared in a single night, and you once asked me why Rachel ever pawned the Rolex in the first place. If they were capable of stealing so much, why bother? I nodded, the question gnawing at me. Because that happened before all of this, Edward said. At the time, they didn't have access to company accounts. Vanessa wasn't a part of the business yet, and Rachel didn't know how to move money without getting caught. They needed fast, untraceable cash, and they needed it immediately. He slid another paper toward me. Bank statements, red-circled and annotated. Her boyfriend was deep in debt. Not credit cards, the dangerous kind. Loan sharks, threats. They needed tens of thousands of dollars within days. The company funds were too risky to touch then. Too many eyes, too much paper trail. But your father's assets? He gave a humorless laugh. Those were easier to exploit. How about my father? I asked quietly. He's ignorant, Edward said, or maybe he decided not to see it. In any case, he let them go wild, and now they've nearly destroyed everything I built. I leaned back, the air heavy between us. What are you going to do? Edward's face darkened. I'm cutting them off, all of them. Over the next hour, he laid out his plan. His lawyers were already restructuring the family trust. My father's name was being removed as a beneficiary. Every asset, real estate, shares, bonds, would bypass him entirely. The money that was supposed to sustain him in retirement would be gone. Vanessa and Rachel will not smell a thing, Edward continued. They had their opportunity, and they demonstrated they couldn't be trusted with our family's heritage. I didn't know what to say. It was a major decision, not just punishment, but final judgment. There's one more thing, Edward added. I'm setting aside a portion of the estate for you, not because you deserve it, but because you earned it. You've shown integrity when everyone else around you has shown greed. I shook my head. I didn't do any of this for money. I know, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. That's exactly why you deserve it. The fallout was immediate. Within days, word spread that Edward had rewritten his will, and Vanessa was furious. Rachel spiraled. Her cards were stopped, her accounts depleted, her projects crumbling. She wrote me a long, rambling message online one night, screaming for help. She phoned Edward's attorney several times, threatening litigation, but none of it mattered. The documentation was airtight. Even after I blocked my father's number, he kept calling from new ones, leaving dozens of voicemails that swung between rage and desperation. In one, he shouted that I had turned Edward against his own son. In another, he begged me to talk. I deleted them all without responding. 2 weeks later, Edward phoned again. It's done, he said simply. The trust is finalized. They're shut off. I asked how my father reacted. He's outraged, Edward said, but he still doesn't understand why this is happening. He blames everyone but himself. Vanessa is talking divorce, while Rachel is drowning in debt. A week after Edward signed the trust, the shockwaves began. At first, nothing obvious changed, just a shift in tone when my father's name was mentioned. Calls weren't returned. Meetings were rescheduled. People he once called friends suddenly became too busy. It was the kind of silence that always comes before everything falls apart. Within 2 weeks, the first cracks appeared. When word of the trust changes reached the firm and whispers spread throughout the legal community, an internal audit was called. Officially, it was routine. But everyone knew why it was happening. Investigators dug into records, and soon enough, patterns began to emerge. Unapproved transfers, forged documents, missing funds. Vanessa's name appeared in connection to embezzlement. The deeper they looked, the worse it got. An investigation into Carter Holdings was launched, exposing every detail of their scheme. By the second month, the situation had exploded. The media caught wind of it, and headlines were brutal. Rachel's influencer brand was exposed as a front for laundering money from company accounts. My father's reputation, decades in the making, collapsed in days. The firm suspended him, pending an inquiry. State regulators opened a case. Clients vanished overnight. By the third month, Edward's lawyers began reclaiming the family home. It would take time, but it was inevitable. Creditors called daily. Accounts were frozen. Sponsorships disappeared. Rachel's projects failed, one after another, and Vanessa's carefully curated image crumbled. By the 5th month, humiliation had become public. When the eviction notice arrived, Rachel completely lost it. She stormed onto Edward's property, screaming that he was ruining the family. Edward listened quietly before answering with a single sentence. Family does not fabricate signatures. Family does not empty accounts or frame their own blood. This is the result of your choices. The house went on the market weeks later. Rachel's luxury SUV was repossessed. Vanessa was photographed shouting at debt collectors, the pictures going viral. Rachel tried to salvage her image with a redemption video. Vanessa filed for divorce, launching a second chance rebrand online, crying on camera about growth and forgiveness. Her sponsors and followers disappeared. She quietly deleted everything. She accused Gregory of emotional neglect and betrayal, hoping for a payout. But Edward's lawyers had sealed every loophole. The accounts were frozen. The trust untouchable. There was nothing left for her to win. Gregory's professional life was also over. No firm would hire him. His name was toxic, and the man who once preached control now had none. He left me one final voicemail, which I never answered. She left, he said quietly. I gave them everything. I listened once, his voice hollow, defeated, and deleted it. I saw him once by accident in a grocery store. He looked older and smaller, as if the weight of every decision he'd ever made had finally caught up with him. His once straight posture was bent. His hands shook slightly as he reached for a carton of milk. For a moment, our eyes met. Recognition flickered. He opened his mouth to speak, but I kept walking. There was nothing left to say. When I told Edward about it later, he sighed, his voice low but steady. It's hard to watch, he admitted. But sometimes the only way to stop rot is to let it collapse under its own weight. He was right. None of us had destroyed them. We hadn't needed to. They'd done it to themselves, one selfish choice at a time. Their downfall wasn't loud or cinematic. It was slow, humiliating, and final. And for the first time since I was 19, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Life after their downfall was quiet, almost unsettlingly so. For the first time in years, there were no calls filled with guilt, no manipulative messages, no tension hanging over every morning. Just silence. And in that stillness, I began to create a life that had nothing to do with them. I changed my phone number, stopped reading old emails, told extended relatives I didn't want updates. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. I didn't want their chaos leaking into the future I was trying to build. Work became my sanctuary. The degree I'd fought so hard for finally paid off, and I rose quickly through the ranks of a cybersecurity firm. I led projects, recruited my own team, earned respect, the kind I'd begged for once, but now built on my own terms. Every milestone was proof that I'd crafted something sacred out of ruin. I began to travel, not to escape, but to live. From the temples of Kyoto to the mountains of Patagonia, every place reminded me of how far I'd come since that night in the snow. One Christmas Eve, years later, I sat in my car outside the same cafe where my father and I had argued. I remembered the girl who'd stood shivering in that doorway, homeless and heartbroken, and I smiled. She was gone. In her place was a woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. Edward and I became close. He wasn't just my grandfather anymore. He was my anchor. We talked about the future of the family business, and for the first time, I was part of that future. They tried to break you, he told me one evening as we looked out over his garden, but you built yourself stronger than they ever were. A year later, a letter arrived. It was from my father. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. Inside, he confessed everything: his blindness, his anger, his cowardice. He wrote about Vanessa's remarriage and how she'd left him without a word, about how Rachel barely spoke to him now, about how empty his life had become. And at the end, in words I never thought I'd read, he wrote, "I'm sorry. I wish I could go back. I wish I could change everything." I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not his apology, not his approval, not even his love. I had already forgiven him, but the forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. That winter, Edward and I hosted a small Christmas dinner. Beatrice came, along with a few cousins and close friends. It was warm, simple, honest. Everything Christmas was supposed to be. As laughter filled the dining room, Beatrice raised her glass. "Here's to second chances," she said. "The ones we give ourselves." Her words stayed with me. My story was never about revenge. It was about rebuilding after being broken. It was about proving that their choices didn't define who I became. I haven't spoken to my father since that letter. Maybe one day I will. Maybe I won't. If I do, it will be my choice, not his. The girl he threw out on Christmas Eve is gone. What remains is a woman who built her life without their permission, who understands now that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about loyalty, love, integrity. And the woman they tried to destroy, she didn't just survive. She became unstoppable.